Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's special conversation on Black maternal health and environmental justice. My name is Zinhle Essamuah. I'm a host and correspondent here at NowThis, or at Simply Zinhle online. And tonight, I'm going to be moderating this discussion brought to you in partnership with Black Millennials for Flint, Climate Power, and NowThis News. We're going to be talking about Black maternal health, the connection between climate action, reproductive justice, and racial equity, and what all of this politics of the moment means for many of these different movements. Tonight, I am joined by a powerhouse panel. Hello, ladies. Wonderful to have you. I'm joined by Representative London Lamar, Vanessa, Vassall, Cherisse Scott, and LaTricea Adams. To give you a bit of context on who all of these women are, Cherisse has worked in reproductive justice for 15 years and has led her team to achieve a strong presence regarding their education, policy, and advocacy, culture change, and harm reduction work for the most vulnerable people in Tennessee. Representative Lamar currently serves as the state representative for District 91 and is the youngest legislator in the current 111th Tennessee General Assembly. She has advocated and advanced policies on national, state, and local levels, supporting families and advancing healthcare. Vanessa Vassall is the Maternal Health National Program Director for Black Millennials for Flint and a former lead prevention ambassador. Vanessa's approach to environmental justice centers intentional efforts to reduce preventable Black and brown maternal and infant death by centering life-saving scope of practice of community-based doulas, midwives, and ancestral birth workers. We're going to be talking about a lot of this tonight. And last but not least, LaTricea Adams is the founder, CEO, and president of Black Millennials for Flint, a grassroots environmental justice and civil rights organization with the purpose of bringing together like-minded organizations against the crisis of lead exposure, specifically in African American and Latinx communities throughout the nation. She's also the co-founder of the Memphis Restorative Justice Coalition. Clearly, we've got some heavy hitters. That was a mouthful. So thank you all so much for joining. Before we start this conversation, we're going to watch a quick 1-minute video. It was recently released by Black Millennials for Flint and Climate Power, and it shows how the city of Flint and its leaders continue battling a number of crises. Obviously, right now we're in COVID, there's a water crisis, and there's a climate crisis. So let's watch how this area is grappling with many of these challenges.
Injustice to one person is injustice to all. Climate change definitely affects Black communities different than white communities, simply because a lot of the injustice takes place, unfortunately, in Black communities. At the Revive Community Health Center, I'm the executive director, and we are really focused on making sure that we provide and address the health disparities, especially within the African American community. Environmental justice and Black maternal health are definitely connected when you think about the air that we breathe and how that gets transferred to our children that we're carrying as mothers. One of the things that moved me to vote for Joe Biden in regards to climate change is the fact that he acknowledged it. For me, environmental justice looks like a level playing field that's balanced for all nationalities.
That video clearly offers a glimpse into maternal health and environmental justice for Black people in America today. So that's where I want to start our conversation. I want to start with a rapid fire question. Really, it's having you all finish the sentence and telling us why. So talk to us. The state of Black maternal health and environmental justice is blank. I want you to fill in that blank and briefly tell us why you think that's the state of these issues. Why don't we start with you, LaTricea?
For the complete that, I would say that both of those entities are grounded in environmental racism. I think that can really sum it up.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, London?
I would say it's a necessity. Us combating and looking at the intersections of environmental justice and maternal health is necessary for Black women to live, and that's why we have to have the conversation.
Thanks for framing that. And Vanessa, let's go to you. The state of Black maternal health and environmental justice is?
The state of Black health and environmental justice does not need to wait for white folks to come in and save us. I think that would be my completion to that statement.
Okay, and last but not least, Cherisse.
Yeah, I think that the state of Black maternal health and environmental justice is at that intersection quite weak right now. Our folks are abandoned. We don't have adequate health care across the country. We don't have a real investment in ensuring that Black mothers in particular can thrive, are employed, have all of the necessary needs in order to live and to have sustainable communities and safe communities. And we're expecting a bit too much with no infrastructural support.
Yeah, and I want to begin diving into all of that. Obviously, we're talking about this in the context of a pandemic, and I know COVID-19 has been described as a great amplifier. It's really amplified a lot of the disparities that have already existed, specifically in the Black community. LaTricea, I'm mindful that right now our country is undergoing a massive wave of climate-related crises. I know you just described having issues with water and power. So can you maybe explain to our audience who might not be familiar the connection between maternal health, reproductive justice, climate action, and racial equity? How would you describe that?
So while I know in the intro, the way that I completed that sentence was very brief, but I think the number one thing that we have to make sure that we use the correct language around is that all of these things, as it relates to injustice, is grounded in systemic racism and white supremacy. I think that as we have started to see these things unearthed, and when I say we, I'm talking about as a country, because Black and brown folks have known about these issues and how they are all interconnected since forever, right? And I think that since COVID-19 has happened, and I would be remiss not to talk about this one other aspect that kind of brought everything to a head. Last year was absolutely devastating as it relates to police brutality. However, when you combine the acts of civil unrest with police brutality and COVID, and then you brought in environmental justice, we started as a country to develop this sense of consciousness. And so when you think about the horrors of white supremacy, it invades all spaces. So it invades our reproductive health. We have to think about like the history of slavery in this country. Once, we stopped being in chattel slavery, then what's the use for Black people, right? So we have to have these really realistic, keeping it 100 conversations about where we are as a country. And another thing that is very critical around the intersections of environmental justice, reproductive justice, maternal health, it's not Black and brown people who hadn't been organizing around these things from a holistic perspective. We are the legacy of the earth. We know how Mother Earth exists and how it survives. That same aspect of white supremacy forces us as a nation to act and interact in silos. Being from African ancestry, everything is tribal in nature and interconnected. And so I think for the first time, if we want to talk about environmental justice, if we want to talk about reproductive justice, maternal health, the Black and brown people who started these movements need to be at the front and center of these conversations.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that point of almost a renewed or new consciousness that we saw in the US. And right now, obviously, we have a new presidential administration. We have the Biden administration. One of their early executive orders was to make environmental justice part of the mission of every part of his administration, right? That included delivering 40% of overall benefits of relevant federal investments to disadvantaged communities. Representative Lamar, I wonder, as a policy maker, do you think this will be effective? Do you think this consciousness is turning into tangible action right now?
Absolutely. I think that our consciousness has led to us seeing policy movement and policy changes. And for the conversation, it's starting off and it's allowing us being able to implement policies and strategies to combat, mitigate, or eliminate systemic injustices and barriers to health equity and environmental justice. What I mean by that is us having our conversation is allowing individuals like myself in the position to make changes, to be able to pass legislation and policies that's going to hold medical professionals and our leaders accountable to the lives of Black and Brown communities. Most importantly, outside of me being able to be a woman who is an elected official and able to pass laws and policies to hold these individuals accountable, I'm also someone who has living and breathing the injustices when it comes to Black maternal health and environmental justice. It's not only important to hold our leaders accountable, but it's important to put women in these positions who have actually been disadvantaged by the system to tell our stories right now, so that when we get up there and we're advocating for Black and Brown lives, we're advocating for our, when we're able to bring ourselves to the work and be able to put a story behind that, you see more women being able to get things done and more policies being put in place. With Kamala Harris being the first African-American female vice president of the United States, and is someone who's also led maternal health care advocacy in the United States Senate when she was there, I'm more confident than ever that as we continue to talk about this and have conversations about the need for policy change around maternal health and environmental justice, we can go to Vice President Kamala Harris and say, this is something that you champion, and we need you to continue to be our champion in the Oval Office with President Joe Biden.
Yeah, and you both have highlighted how for so long, Black and Brown people, specifically women, have already been championing this work. I know that more recently, many organizations and politicians and policymakers are making commitments about health equity and anti-racism, right? As I mentioned, the Biden administration has committed to environmental justice. I know even locally in New York, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced the start of an environmental justice study just this past month. So I also hear from critics, though, many of whom are BIPOC people, saying, hey, we've done this for a long time and these promises have been made before and we haven't seen anything. So Cherisse, I'd love to hear from you. What do you believe is involved in truly committing to anti-racism in this work, especially when it comes to health equity and environmental justice?
Sure. I think that there's an important opportunity here to finally look at the things that, to kind of continue what Representative Lamar was saying, to finally look at some of the issues that are impacting folks and allowing those who are most impacted to lead what that work is supposed to look like, to set the agenda for what that work needs to look like, so that we can truly center their needs, their voices, and their experiences. Some things I want to highlight very specifically is like access to housing, for example, for Black mothers, right? We're expecting, we want to shame Black mothers because many of us are not able to keep a roof over our children's head, but we're not bringing the intersection in of being underemployed, really looking at what does equal pay look like for Black mothers if Black mothers are still making 68% on every dollar that is made by a white man. How do you really expect for Black mothers to be able to center the needs of their families and they can't take care of their families? Or how do we expect for a place like Tennessee, where we are, where our governor refuses to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, even though that's now at this point inadequate. But it at least would be a start to be of a national opportunity for every person to have some level of equity, for those of us who maybe haven't gone to college, don't have some of the skills to have higher wages, to be able to live, not have to work multiple jobs, to be able to parent our children. The work that we do at SisterReach is reproductive justice, a framework started by Black women. And one of those core principles of the work that those Black women started in 1994 was to make sure that every woman and individual had the human right to a quality of life, right, that was sustainable before, during, and after that person was able to become pregnant. So we can't expect folks to do well if they don't have proper employment, if they don't have access to health care, if our children are being kicked off of state health care plans, if we can't afford to feed them fresh fruits and vegetables because we live in food deserts. You can't expect, to get blood from a turnip, right? We've got to be able to create an infrastructure for folks to thrive, for folks to live in abundance, which is really their birthright, right? Their birthright, even as stated in the 14th Amendment. Like, we've got access. We're supposed to have a particular level of baseline access that everybody does not have. And so, those are some of the places where we can add that conversation. as well as making sure that, it's one thing to make sure that mama is cool, but are we also making sure that the children are okay? Thinking about the efforts of some of those frontline folks in education reform, trying to make sure that our children, when they leave our homes and when we can entrust them into the school system, that it's not just another point of entry for them to be looped into the criminal justice system. We're just not being fair about the ways that we want to set up a situation so that young people and their moms can have access to the abundance that they all deserve. So.
No, that's great. And I'm glad you touched on some of the specific work your organization has done. I wonder, before we, I guess, continue on the general policy, the state of the union in the realm of Black maternal mortality and environmental justice, what kind of work that you all are doing on the ground do you want to highlight? What do you think is incredibly effective? What is working based on your experiences? We can start with you, Cherisse.
Yeah, well, some of the work that we've been doing since the beginning of SisterReach, we're almost 10 years old this year. We, first of all, been teaching women about their bodies, right? I think that there's a misconception that just because you're grown, you understand your body, you know when you're fertile, you know when you are ovulating and when you can become pregnant, that you understand how to ask your partner to put a condom on, that you aren't in danger if you're doing those types of things. So we've been making sure that folks have access to reproductive and sexual health education as a center and foundation of our work. We've also been doing research as a community-based organization because I just wasn't pleased with what I saw being, led, some of the research being led by white institutions where folks were being, brought in to give a narrative of what was happening in Black communities without engaging those community members about the work that is happening in their lives or the oppressions that they were navigating from day to day. So we've talked to parents, we've talked to students, we've talked to teachers. What do you need? They said we need access to sex education. We're fighting public policy that impacts people's ability to be self-determining. We're fighting to make sure that folks, because we're not just talking about cisgendered heterosexual mamas either. We're talking about queer mothers too, right? Those who also identify as masculine presenting. We've got to make sure that every mama has access. We're talking about mothers who are homeless. We're talking about immigrant mamas, and making sure that we're also trying to fight efforts also to control our bodies by forcing sterilization or long-acting reversible contraceptives on our people, very specifically Black and brown mothers very specifically. But since we're talking about Black maternal health, Black mamas, both teen and adult mothers, have been the center of many pro-life conservative attempts to try to control our bodies in order to control population, but still having no supplemental support to undergird the fact that we're still needing education and access and employment and access to social support so that we can live and we can thrive. So research, education, harm reduction. We're giving them free HIV tests. We're now trying to expand that to Hep C support. We're trying to make sure that we're offering housing support. Last year, when COVID first hit, we were like, oh my God, like what are we going to do to try to support folks? So we redirected funds and we poured, almost $250,000 into Memphis just to make sure that people had food and access to PPE, utility assistance, those types of things, along with so many other local efforts of folks really joining together to do that work. So that's some of the work that we've been doing here on the local and state level. And then we can staying in the national conversation, bringing, highlighting what's happening in the Southeast very specifically, in Tennessee, in Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Kentucky, all 5 states of which SisterReach works in, and have been trying to do advocacy to support Black mothers and families.
That's great. And it's clear you all have your hands full. There's no shortage of issues to be addressing. Vanessa, I know you do a lot of hands-on work with doulas. I wonder if you can speak to that side of the direct hands-on care. What have you seen that's effective and working?
Absolutely. So I'll first, kind of speak to what Black Millennials for Flint has been doing lately as it pertains to our national maternal health program. And, over the past, I would say, year, we've really found a way to prioritize moms and babies when it comes to this reproductive justice and environmental justice intersection through our Black and Brown Alliance. And the first effort was really calling on our community partners that are already doing the work and teaming up with folks who, are already in the space of doula care, community midwifery, ancestral birth work, whatever the case may be, and saying, what are your needs and what are your priorities when it comes to environmental justice, even if that's not the language that's necessarily been used to describe those efforts. When you're talking about a family, when you're talking about 7 years of a water crisis in Flint, Michigan, you're talking about kindergartners who have never had running water that was safe to drink, that have never brushed their teeth and washed their body with safe water. What does that mean for a mom who has never, had lactation coaching and has been under anxiety for her last 2 children, let's say, as it pertains to bottle feeding, as it pertains to formula feeding? So what type of resources can we provide to these folks across the country? There is a Flint in almost all 50 states. We can't sit up here and act like that's not the case. There has been a Flint for our mothers, our grandmothers, and our great-grandmothers. It wasn't called that. It wasn't on the internet. It wasn't on TV. It may have just been word of mouth at church, word of mouth at the barbershop. But we have been poisoned for so long that, that even though we have this seminal event that was placed on the world stage, that's not the beginning and the end of these efforts, right? And so I say that to say our Black and Brown Alliance has teamed up with some fantastic organizations across the country, Mama Toto Village in DC, Ancient Song in New York and New Jersey. The list goes on with the organizations that we've worked with in California, across the country. And we want to ensure that whatever we can do to support them and whatever they can do to support us, that we have, as LaTricea said earlier, that tribal loop of support, that tribal loop of communication. And as of late, with the transition into this new presidential administration, which is led, by Vice President Harris, who is one of the founding members of the Black Maternal Health Caucus, it was alongside Representative Lauren Underwood and Representative Alma Adams, it was particularly important that we ensure that policy moving forward doesn't continue to be kind of this rewording what the Black Maternal Health Caucus has already been put out there for at least the last 2 years, have said, hey, these are our recommendations, this is our policy, but we want to make sure that there is an environmental justice component to all of that. And then the flip side, the climate, I'm going to call it the wrong thing, LaTricea, so apologize. But the, what was the policy that with Nancy Pelosi? It was the Climate Action Now. Is that correct? Thank you. The climate crisis report.
The House Committee on the Climate Crisis.
Yeah. Thank you, y'all. I'm so sorry. But when the House
You're deep
Committee
in
on
the
the
work.
Climate
I love
Crisis,
it.
I'm deep, and sometimes I get some things mixed up, but that's why you always have somebody wise to ask, and you humble yourself and you ask those questions so you don't say the wrong thing. So the Climate Action, when their report came out, we realized there was nothing in there specifically discussing Black and Brown moms. There wasn't enough. And so if we're going to talk about this intersection, we have to call it what it is and not dance around it with flowery language and not remix, something that's already been stated, and not mansplain to mothers in America and not white-splain to Black and Brown moms in America. No, we need to call it what it is and actually address it and fix it. So I've been so grateful to be affiliated with, Black Millennials for Flint ever since I was a lead prevention ambassador and now national program director for maternal health. But we're doing the work, and we're connecting with these community-based birth workers that are actually hands-on with clients.
That's great. And I do want to you all have touched on so many different issues and facets of this topic. And I want to put it in context for anyone just joining us. We're talking about Black maternal mortality and environmental justice and injustice. And the numbers around Black maternal mortality are really staggering, right? Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die than their white counterparts. And this is not new, right? As early as 1960, women were 4 times, we were at the same rate, Black women, for maternal mortality. And so knowing that, Representative Lamar, I wonder if from the policy perspective, I know with the new administration, the Surgeon General recently released a 5-year action plan. And the goal was ambitious. It was to reduce the national maternal mortality rate by 50% for all mothers and birthing people. Is this realistic? And do you think we truly will prioritize the health of Black and Brown moms and birthing people?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And, first and foremost, I want to say anything's possible. And so I'm optimistic that saying it and speaking it into existence, you're going to work towards such a great goal. I do, before I want to get into how I feel about policy, I do want to acknowledge the fact that in order for us to really, truly get systemic changes, you need outside organizations doing the work. So thank you to Black Millennials for Flint. I had the privilege of working under Cherisse at SisterReach to do reproductive justice work. And as a policymaker, I know my lane, and what I'm tasked to do is to pass legislation. But we also got to have organizations like Black Millennials and Flint and SisterReach on the ground, continuing the policy work that we're doing up here. So I just really want to shout them out and thank you for everything that you're doing. But I know that I'm not dependent on anybody's administration to get things done for Black maternal health. As a state legislator in Tennessee, I'm doing what I'm doing now, regardless of the Biden's administration or anybody's administration. I've committed to making sure I create a maternal health an agenda for every session that I am here. My first session last year, I passed 2 legislative bills as a freshman to combat maternal health that cross sections with education. If you receive the Hope Scholarship, you'll be able to take a additional year off and not lose your scholarship money, because we can't be a pro-life state and then don't put in opportunities for mothers to get their education and have their children at the same time. I've also passed a bill that pregnant prisoners must receive prenatal and postpartum care while they are in jails. You know, we can't talk about criminal justice reform when we're not talking about the fact that Black women are some of the highest rising populations in prisons. And yes, they do have children. They deserve dignity, and their children deserve services and resources, even though their parent may have potentially made a mistake. But this year, I've doubled my maternal health agenda here in Tennessee, and I'm passing 4 pieces of legislation that cross-section between environmental justice and Black maternal health. The first piece of legislation I'm pushing this week is lead in the drinking water, making sure we are testing the lead levels in our children's drinking water. And I'm working for Black Millennials for Flint on this legislation. It passed the House last year, and we're trying to get it through the Senate. And what this does is going to hold the Department of Education and the Department of Health accountable to creating a statewide lead testing program, so that we're not just talking about, the mothers. We are also prioritizing the children, because they're drinking lead waters and continue to drink lead waters throughout their educational journey. Their bodies are not healthy enough to have strong pregnancies down the line. And so that's one way we are intersecting environmental justice and maternal health. Tomorrow, I'm presenting a House Joint Resolution to officially recognize doulas as necessary health professionals. What we do know is we have doulas. We know that women are less likely to die and have C-sections, which we know is also the socioeconomic impacts of having major surgery during childbirth, and the fact that more doctors are putting Black women through C-sections because it cuts down on time and it makes more money. And so we need to make sure doulas get the support that they need, because they actually ensure that less Black women are dying at the hands of pregnancy. I also have an implicit bias bill I'm pushing, which is going to require medical professionals to undergo implicit bias training in order to renew their healthcare license or receive their healthcare license. And this is going to bring accountability to the table legislatively, because now we have in law, if this bill passes, that these medical professionals are accountable to knowing what it takes to service a person of color, especially when it comes to giving them OBGYN care and other necessary medical care regarding their pregnancies. And finally, pushing a bill to create a task force to study African American maternal mortality rates here in Tennessee. Just like the nation, if you are in Tennessee, you are 3 times more likely to die against any other white woman when it comes to pregnancy. And 100% of those deaths that we've seen have been deemed preventable. So we have an obligation in Tennessee, and myself as a lawmaker, to put in and things in place to hold medical professionals accountable and get our legislature to acknowledge the need for these services, these individuals to be held accountable to our lives. Because if we truly are a pro-life state, then the lives of all Tennesseans, no matter your sex, your race, or any other demographic you have to be a priority. And if we want to do that beyond my legislative agenda and what we're doing on the ground, we have to commit to funding these initiatives in these organizations and in these operations. I don't want to hear the insurance companies coming to my colleagues saying, well, we don't want to pay for doulas. Well, if you don't want to make the investment into making sure Black women can live, don't say you're really for Black lives, or don't say that you're pro-life and want to advocate against abortion when I'm coming to you saying Black women are dying and you're telling me my maternal health agenda is not important. We have to hold people's feet to the fire, and my role in this overall agenda to make sure that we are reducing that number by 50%, as the Biden administration wants to do, is to make sure we're holding them accountable. And in my role, I could put in policies in place to combat these issues.
Thank you so much for outlining that, Representative Lamar. It's clear your legislative agenda is both deep and wide, and I do want to turn to you, LaTricea. But before I do, quick follow-up, Representative, because I think I heard a tad bit of breaking news. So are you going to be announcing new legislation tomorrow around doulas being essential workers?
Absolutely. Tomorrow at 12:30 in our Tennessee House Health Subcommittee, I will be presenting HJR4. HJR4, you can go to capitol.tn.gov to look at the legislation. And I will be asking my colleagues to support this legislation to recognize doulas as essential healthcare professionals. I've been shopping the bill around. It looks like it's gotten the support that I've needed. And again, I truly want to talk about, I know I have the support because before, last year, I didn't understand how important it was until things happened to me. And so now I'm able to come back in front of you and say, I'm not just advocating for Black lives, I'm advocating for my life too. You're a colleague, the only woman in the state house who's of childbearing ages. And so you have to do more for me and all the women who are being impacted by the maternal health issues. And the doulas don't even just, support Black women. They support all women. But specifically, we want to make sure Black women are dying. I need you to support this legislation. So I ask that everyone watching, wish me luck.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that update. And I'm mindful, obviously, that as I mentioned at the top of this, right, COVID is heightening a lot of disparities. We know that Black and Brown communities are disproportionately suffering and dying from COVID. But it also seems that we're hearing even more disparities as vaccines are being distributed. Obviously, there's vaccine hesitancy in the Black community. So, LaTricea, I'd love to hear from you. Is there anything that's maybe underreported or going unseen right now, whether by media or people who are not directly involved with this work, that you think absolutely needs to be known?
Absolutely. So one thing, while we do, talk about just the disproportionate impacts that occur with maternal health with Black women, our immigrant population definitely goes unseen. Especially coming out of, and I don't even want to say his name, but I'll keep it cute. With this previous administration, just the mere fear of even attempting to seek medical support if you are an immigrant. I think that there is definitely a lack of research and data that really acknowledges some of the strife and challenges that are specific to immigrant populations. Another thing that is very, very critical is that when we say immigrant, our immigration population, that does not automatically mean our Latinx brothers and sisters. There are people from African descent, Black people, that are also immigrants to this country. And I think that our numbers could actually look even more morbid if we really took an inclusive approach to capturing that data. Another thing that is really important that it is not captured appropriately. And I want to give a shout out to this beautiful sister that's out of Flint, is not really studying the nuances that are associated with women who have had a series of miscarriages or births that's not carried to term. And that also intersects with what is called body burden. So body burden is just the cumulative impact of environmental hazards and toxins that have existed within your body since before you were even born. So quick example, and I'm trying not to nerd out about this, but let's say that when you were a child, you were exposed to lead. Praise God, you didn't necessarily have any of the issues that manifested visibly while you were a child. When lead enters into your body, it's temporarily in your bloodstream. After it leaves your bloodstream, it goes into your bones. You grow up, you become of childbearing age, you have a baby. That lead is then released from your bones back into your bloodstream, now not just impacting you as a mother, but also impacting this unborn child. So it is imperative that when we talk about the intersections of maternal health, reproductive justice, environmental justice, that we're thinking about the legacy of pollution, the legacy of poisoning that happens to Black and brown people. And we have to look at this from a very inclusive lens. I want to just connect back to what Cherisse mentioned, is that all Black mamas matter, period. So we have to really come out of this heterosis guys around who is impacted, because the data and research surrounding all women who bear children is just not there. The investment is not there. And so in order for us to make the best sound decisions so that we can have policymakers like Representative Lamar to make the best recommendations for policy at the legislature, is to have that research that is done by people who show up in that research. I don't need white people to talk about my life, right? There are people who are Black and brown that are very much so capable of telling you how it is, because it's a lived experience. So I'll stop there before I get too passionate about that. But I think that those are some cross sectors that are very important and critical to consider.
No, that's great. And I know even earlier you had mentioned how so many of the frameworks for the progress happening are built on the work of BIPOC women and activists of color. I wonder, Vanessa, if you can speak to any recommendations for organizations or policymakers or health officials on how to gain trust from communities of color, because obviously we've spoken pretty intensely about the disparities communities of color face. Many of these have fallen along racial lines. And so how do we incorporate justice into this kind of work and also gain the trust that's needed to move forward?
Yeah, so excuse me, that's a great question. And I would actually start my response by continuing on with what LaTricea was already stating around who are the investigators that are collecting this data that we consider to be valuable data. Who are these white male investigators who are put on a pedestal and we're saying, well, that's the data that we're going to use to support this, and that's what's important, versus saying lived experience and oral history is data. Oral history and lived experience is qualitative data that is extremely valuable. We have doctoral researchers, academic researchers, corporate researchers, pharmaceutical researchers that are Black women who are doing this research, and they're not being cited. Their work is not being published, or if it's being published, it's not being amplified as the experts. So we have this issue with, we're talking about trust, but we're talking about, well, who do we trust here? This isn't really an issue of whether or not, Black folks need to trust white data. We don't need to do that. We don't need to wait for them to value our lives. We've been talking about our lives, just the minimum of mattering. I could go on about that, but I think when we talk about trust, we have to talk about our knowledge being valuable, and not just to the wider research community, but to each other. Are we partnering? Are we trusting each other and saying, we have this Black experience and you have this brown experience, and what does this look like if we support each other? What does this look like if we continue what our foremothers have been doing, which is wrapping our arms around our community, because we have to save each other. And I really, truly believe this, because if you look at, some of the data you mentioned earlier, 3 to 4 times, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die. We've been saying that for 60 years. Our great grandmothers, and mothers have all been saying the same thing. So if we don't take a multi-generational approach to policy, if we don't take a multi-generational approach to programming, we're going to continue to be seeing this and worse numbers. I think there's a framework out there that talks about two generations, and I apologize that I don't remember the university that has coined this phrase, but Black and brown folks cannot afford to take anything less than a 3-generational approach to anything when it comes to preventing maternal death and preventing infant death. When we talk about what LaTricea just mentioned, not the pregnant women today, it's the baby that's in their stomach and the baby that may be in that daughter's stomach if she so chooses to have children that we need to be thinking about when we're making these changes. And I think, or when we're trying to influence change and reform. And so when you talk about trust, I mean, sometimes the conversation's a bit of a distraction, in my opinion. We talk about, oh, well, Tuskegee this, and what's happening right now is what's happening on the world stage right now with the COVID vaccine, what's happening right now when folks are, don't know who to trust, don't know, we're not even amplifying that those feelings are valid. We're letting people be depressed and anxious about what's going on with the vaccine, what's going on with COVID, and not even giving validation to the fact that for generations, the FDA has said, oh, well, the federal government does not, do research on pregnant women. No, the federal government does not do research on pregnant American women. The federal government does research on pregnant women in other countries. And if those women from those other countries have family here or eventually immigrate here, we can't sit up here and act like their lives didn't matter just because the federal government of the United States was doing research on them in their home country. And so they were, able to get around that conversation, able to get around that rhetoric. I think that it's important to validate the concerns of the mixed messages around the COVID vaccine and whether or not pregnant women should get it because of the lack of informed consent, because of the lack of information. And even if we sit up here and say, oh, well, it's safe enough, so take it, or it's not safe enough, so don't take it, and we'll see what happens. That's still research being done on American women. We're just going to wait until after something happens to report about it. We're just going to wait until after something happens to take note of it. And I think that, I don't know, I just have a lot of concerns about these mixed messages. And so, back to what LaTricea was saying about, us being a tribe and us working together, there are researchers of color in every university in this country. And if there aren't, then obviously the recruitment and retention are not working. There are Black women of color who are doing corporate research, who are even doing entrepreneurial research. They're doing pharmaceutical research, and we are not putting what their findings are first. We're not putting the population that trusted those investigators enough to be in those studies forward. That's what's important. It's not important to say, oh, well, we use the census and we talk to these people. No, who are the people who trusted the people that we trust? Put them on the platform. Let's hear what they got to say. And let's hear what the women of the Black Maternal Caucus have to say. We put them second. When this report from the Surgeon General came out in December, I read it and I said, this looks really familiar. This looks like something I've read a million times. The difference is the names on it are different. The people who've been having this conversation aren't in the citations. Why are we just refreshing and renewing and having the same conversations over and over, but not actually taking action? People like Representative Lamar are taking action, but we have to be taking that 2 and 3 generational action forward. And a lot of that means taking these lived experiences, these lived anxieties as true data, taking social media data as real data. People may not say something because they code switching at work. They're code switching at the doctor's office. They're code switching with the lady at the counter because as soon as she saw she had Medicaid, the mom had to, be on her best behavior so she doesn't, be treated differently. But then she goes on Black Twitter and says how she really felt, how she was really treated. That is very valuable and important data, especially in the world of COVID. So,
yeah,
go ahead.
And I just want to, I think that's important that you said that, and is that the medical community has an obligation to rebuild trust, to go back to your question, by first at least acknowledging that you did the Black community wrong. First, just acknowledge that you did not do right by us. Acknowledge the fact that, yes, you use Black bodies for experimentation. Yes, you use the Tuskegee Project as experimentation. Yes, you manipulated Henrietta Lacks and used her cells for all of this medical research and then took the money and didn't give it to her family. Yes, acknowledge that Black people have a right not to trust you when it comes to our healthcare. And until we acknowledge that there's wrongdoing, then no wonder there's not being policies and legislation put in place, because we won't even acknowledge the fact that I didn't do right by you. And so that's what is important, that in this conversation, we have to have those folks saying, what data needs to be used or what you should be doing, or validating or invalidate your healthcare experience by you contributed to my distrust of the healthcare field. You have contributed to environmental injustices in my community. And if you are serious about getting it right, acknowledge it, and then put some commitment and action behind it to get it right, and put our people in places, not only on the ground doing the work and you're giving their organizations money, but also put us in elected positions in order to get that done. And not only do we have to put the money in the organizations, but we also got to encourage more environmental justice advocates, more maternal health advocates to run for office. People don't want to touch politics. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to be involved in it. It looks messy. I don't believe in the political process, but I'm trying to show people, even in my role, that that's a necessary role in this overall agenda to getting things done and holding our people accountable to the injustice they have done to us historically, and putting accountability measures so that we can get it right going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you all have hit on just so much. And I think some of the biggest threads being the fact that this is generational work, right? We're not just talking about women and birthing people and communities of color today, but ancestors past and those in the future. Also, this need to acknowledge wrongs done in order to amend and move forward. And so I want to end with two questions for all of you, mindful that we're beginning to hit the end of our time. First of all, what are the most important environmental justice and reproductive justice issues that our generation must prioritize? We've hit on so much, but of everything that we've just discussed, what do you believe must be prioritized and addressed most immediately? Let's start with you, Cherisse, and then get everybody.
Sure. I think first of all, since we're talking about healthcare and that this is the center of this conversation, everybody has to have access to it, right? Regardless of their ability to pay, right? So it doesn't matter whether or not you're employed. If you're unemployed, you ought to be able to go to the doctor, get preventative and interventive care so that you can live healthy and so that you can thrive. Access to employment is also extremely important. If I can't, pay my bills, then I can't pay my health insurance, right? If I can't pay my health insurance, I can't take care of myself. Folks are mothers, especially thinking about, the makeup of the Black community right now. I mean, just the realities is that in most cases, in urban communities, Black mothers run their households. And so she's the last one to make sure, we're making sure that the babies get their teeth clean. We're making sure that they get a checkup, but she hasn't had a mammogram or a pap smear. She doesn't know that she's already in stage 3 breast cancer. She doesn't realize that, that she's dealing with these particular issues. All she knows is that she's always tired, but she's got to keep moving for her family. Black mothers are making decisions to live or to die because they're centering their families even before we're centering ourselves, right? And so being able to have the right type of employment so that we can take care of ourselves and take care of our families, to really be able to compete in a robust community that is attacking our ability to parent, our ability to live, is absolutely important. We have to have strong community investment, right? So, though I run my organization and I want to make sure that SisterReach gets funding so that we can do the work that we need to do, this work, there's a step even before that, right? That there needs to be community investment. There's a whole lot of money going into gentrification. There's a whole lot of money going into trees and grass, but there's no money really going into the people in those communities. As a matter of fact, folks are being bought out of homes that have been in their families for generations, because they're not able to keep up the taxes, or they're not able to compete with incoming developers that are coming into these communities. And so we've got to be able to make sure that that folks are able to not only, that there is true investment in low-income communities and Black communities very specifically. And then we got to trust Black women, right? We got to trust that if Black women say that we need help, then we need help. If Black women say that we are in need of a different type of support from our government, from our legislature, it really doesn't matter to me what folks' personal piety may look like. I don't. You get to praise the God that you praise, and I get to praise the God that I praise. And if I choose not to choose a God to praise, that doesn't mean I'm not supposed to be able to access justice. And so, we've got to be able to combat, especially moral narratives that continue to drive the conversation away from human rights and into a deeper investment in white supremacy, patriarchy, and privilege that absolutely ignores and invisibilizes our presence, our contribution, because we do have a contribution as Black mothers, as Black women, as people who give birth who are Black. We have an opportunity. We deserve an opportunity to be at the table, to set the agenda, to guide the agenda, to inform the agenda, and be able to. And to kind of be the ones that evaluate the work that is being done on our behalf, right, as well. So I would definitely want to lift up that our leadership, our resistance even is necessary in this moment, because nobody's going to center us if we're not centering ourselves. But in spaces and places where we get opportunities to be centered, we can continue to be marginalized because folks don't want to hear our voices, because they don't want to feel the pain that comes with the voice. Nobody wants to lean into the hard conversation and deal with the discomfort of, you abandoned us, but you want to shame me because I'm not meeting a white standard of what you think my motherhood needs to look like. But you've not invested. As a matter of fact, you've called my womb a dangerous place. You've called my child a super predator. And then you expect that I'm supposed to trust when you come to my community and say that you want to help. But you're treating me like I'm not even a human being, and you expect me to believe that you have my best interest at heart. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, and Cherisse, you covered so much that I actually think I want to end on this, which, obviously this Black maternal health, environmental justice, and injustice can be really grim. And so what sustains you all in this work? What gives you hope, if anything? I want to start with you, LaTricea.
So I'm a super Aries where I'm tough on the outside and mushy on the inside, but just this whole panel just fills my heart with so much joy. One of the things that matters so much to me is two things. So one, Black womanhood and sisterhood, and then the other one is intergenerational organizing. I think that is just so paramount. Being a Black woman is the continuity of leadership. One thing that Vanessa said earlier was about like the oral traditions and integrating the aspects of our ancestry into this work is powerful. I like when Representative Lamar said that there's a sense of optimism. So even though it could be very morose, just the power of Blackness. What a time to be a Black woman. I think finally everybody is figuring out that we are dope, but knowing that we have Black women at the helm, I know that we can get some stuff done. So that
Yes.
gives me joy.
Yeah.
Knowing that we have Black women at the helm of making some powerful decisions within our country and also just within our community at large.
Great. Thank you. How about you, Vanessa? What gives you hope? What's sustaining you?
What gives me hope and what gives me optimism for the future are the doulas, are the moms, are the babies, are the students that are doing this research, this next generation of maternal and child health scholars who are replacing a very white centered narrative, that are replacing data with the data of what we see around us. What gives me hope are these community organizers, Generation Z. They are on social media trying to fight for the future that they want to see for themselves and for their children or future children. It gives me a lot of hope that Black Millennials for Flint year after year has new lead prevention ambassadors that come in and gain a new perspective about how to be advocates for environmental justice in wherever they come from, whether it's technology, whether it's business, whether they are Black and brown themselves or not. So I just have a ton of respect for those folks, those young folks. And I have to echo LaTricea. I have so much respect for Black women, or foremothers who have not gotten tired of the fight. The ones that we get the wisdom from are still fighting. The ones that have themselves lost children, who themselves have lost sisters and mothers, and they're still fighting this fight. And they're giving us wisdom, and they are giving us advice and guidance. And those who are here and those who have passed on, I just get so much optimism and spiritual fuel from those.
Thank you. Representative Lamar?
Awesome. Well, first and foremost, I do it because Black women are the mothers of the earth, and we deserve our advocacy to be taken seriously. But I came to this work because my cousin died in 2015 as a result of pregnancy, her and her child. Losing my own baby, rest in heaven, Dallas. I do this work for you because I'm doing it for my own child who was a victim of the injustices of the system, and myself, who I almost lost my life because of that. And so, I do it because I wanted to one day be a mother, and I want to make sure this world is set up so that I and other Black women around this country and this world have the ability to have happy, healthy, and equitable pregnancies, and be able to raise our children in a world that is environmentally just, and that we have free access to all the necessary things we need in order to thrive.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And last but not least, Cherisse, any final thoughts?
I'm doing God's work. This is God's work. This is ministry. This is spiritual work. This is divine work, led by a divine being on behalf of divine beings, right? I am where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to be doing for such a time as this, for who I am, in all of my background and all of that I bring and all that I've experienced. This picture behind me is my mother, who lost her life basically for a failed healthcare system in this state, right? So I do this work for my mother. So Ashe, I say her name, Pearl. I say her name. I say my grandmother's name, Ruth, who died in a nursing home during COVID in November. I say her name, right? So we are doing God's work when we are out here, putting ourselves and our families and our lives on the line, all of us on this panel, and even yourself, to lift up these injustices and to center those who are some of the most impacted disproportionately.
Well, thank you so much. And I must say, I do a lot of these, but there's something powerful about when Black women gather. And so I thank you all for sharing your stories and all of the work that you do. It has been so impactful, and I'm sure many of the viewers here have learned so much. So thank you all for joining us. I hope our panelists stay safe and stay well. Again, if you've been tuning in, this event is brought to you in partnership by Black Millennials for Flint, Climate Power, and Now This. I'm Zinhle Essamuah with Now This, and I just want to thank you so much for making the time, and thank you each for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Stay safe and stay well.
You too.